Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm having some internet problems here. So hopefully things remain stable for the rest of the class. Okay, so we only have 7 people in the class. What's going on? Okay. A few more are joining in now. All right. So there's only 8 people. I don't want to get started too early, Okay, 9 people right now. Okay. Let's just wait for maybe 1 more minute and then we'll start off. Okay, so let's just get started. So any questions on the open channel flow video that I shared? Any questions? Hello, anybody has questions?
Sir,
Yes, Ajay. Okay.
sir, can you share the answer of that Hardy-Cross method problem?
The Hardy-Cross method. Oh, I said we were going to discuss that in today's class, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so actually I haven't solved it, but I have an Excel file that is set up to solve it. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
And what I'll do is I'll share the answers right after class. Okay, I'll just solve it in my Excel file and then share the answers with everybody. But has anybody else tried to solve it?
No, sir.
Uh, Anybody else other than Chakradhar? Nobody's tried it? Okay, Apurv. Unmute yourself, please. Yes.
No.
Did you try solving that Hardy-Cross problem, the pipe network?
No, sir.
Why not?
Then tried.
Didn't try it. Okay. Deepak.
Yes, sir.
Did you try? Morning. Did you try solving that one?
Jai Hind, sir.
Yeah, Jai Hind, sure.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Did you try solving that problem?
Yes, sir. Little bit.
What do you mean little bit? One iteration?
No. I was trying it on MATLAB, sir.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I have the answers also, sir.
So then why did you say little bit?
Yes, only for that one loop I solved, not all.
Well, if it's one loop, then it's not the. How can you say you have the answers? You have one loop.
Answer. Yeah, so that answer I have, sir, in front of.
Okay. Anybody else? Harsha? Harsha, come on quickly. Okay, you have to unmute yourself. Okay, if you won't, I will do it. Okay, Harsha, we can hear you now. Speak up. Okay, he's probably just turned on the classroom and gone away or whatever. All right. So then, Yashwanti.
Sir,
Yes.
I haven't solved it, sir.
Why not?
I'll do it today, sir.
You'll do
Actually, I
it.
forgot.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah. So what I'll do is I'll share a sample solution, right? Different people will get will take different number of iterations depending on your initial guess, right? So if your initial guess is really far from the solution, it may take you one or two more iterations to get to the actual answer. Okay. So I'm going to make some initial guess and solve the problem. And depending on how good or bad my initial guess is, it may take 3, 4, 5, whatever number of iterations. But because it is in Excel, it won't be too much of a difficulty to do it in Excel because it's mostly fairly straightforward. So what I would strongly suggest is that all of you also try to set it up, do one iteration by hand. The remaining you can at least try, with Excel and see what happens. Okay, just to see how long it takes to converge to the solution. All right. Okay. So I'll send that after class, Ajay. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So we'll get going with open channel flow. We've got a lot of material to cover, so let's try to quickly get into open channel flow. The introduction portion, we have already kind of done that already in the previous class, and I've also shown this lecture. So I want to not spend too much time on this. All of this is known to you. Flow of fluid in a conduit with a free surface. That is the fundamental definition of open channel flow. And this free surface is exposed to atmospheric pressure. And the flow in the case of open channels is predominantly gravity driven, unlike in case of pipe flows, which is pressure gradient driven. And then of course I gave some examples, some man-made examples and some natural examples, right? So rivers, streams, estuaries are all naturally occurring open channels, whereas flumes and spillways, canals, weirs, stormwater drains, all of these are man-made examples or artificial examples of open channels, right? So then we spoke about, so this is the, if I give you a longitudinal view of the flow in an open channel, this is what it looks like. I have the bed slope, right? So the bed slope typically will be sloping in the direction of flow, right? So if the flow is from left to right, the slope will be going downwards from left to right, right? Because that is what it means when I say it's gravity driven flow, right? So gravity is taking the flow in the direction of decreasing altitude, right? And then we use the symbol Y or the letter Y to denote the flow depth in an open channel. That is the standard symbol that we use. And then in terms of cross sections, there's many different types of cross sections possible. Especially in the case of man-made channels, you can have trapezoidal, rectangular, triangular, semicircular, and so on, right? Regular geometric shapes are possible when it is a man-made channel, whereas of course when it's a natural channel, you will have irregular shapes, which you can approximate it as a trapezoid sometimes, or you can approximate it as a rectangle and so on. But in general, they are irregular. Okay. So that's the very basic introduction to open channel flow. And then of course we spoke about the classification. This I've already spoken about at length, so I'll not spend too much time. You have steady and unsteady on the basis of time, uniform and varied on the basis of space, and then of course within varied you have gradually varied flow and rapidly varied flow, right? So all of this is all known to you. I'm not going to spend more time on this. Reynolds number, of course, rho v d by mu. Just like we had a classification in pipe flows into laminar, turbulent, and transitional, similarly we have a classification for open channel flow as well. The numbers are of course different because the characteristic length is different in the case of pipe flow as compared to open channel flow and so on. So you get these different different numbers for the different classifications. And then the final one, which you have so far not encountered, is the Froude number, right? So this Froude number is essentially given as V over under root gy, right? And V is basically the velocity of flow. So this could be the average velocity at any given cross section. And under root g of course is acceleration due to gravity, and y is our flow depth, right? So you can also think of it as the ratio of inertial forces to gravitational forces, right? So in the case of open channel flow, we had rho v d by mu. In the case of pipe flow, we had rho v d by mu, which we described as ratio of inertial forces to viscous forces, right? So to find out which one is dominating over the other, we use the Reynolds number, in the case of Froude number, we use it to distinguish between whether inertial forces are dominating with respect to gravitational forces or the other way around, right? So that is what Froude number is. And what Froude number does is it classifies flow into 3 different regimes. If the Froude number is less than 1, we call it subcritical flow. If it is exactly equal to 1, the flow is called critical. And if it is greater than 1, we call it supercritical flows. Okay, so this again, we'll be talking towards the end of the lecture. We'll come back to this Froude number classification. All right. So then we already spoke about writing the energy equation for an open channel flow. So any questions so far? So whatever I've spoken about so far, any questions on it? All right. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to write the energy equation for an open channel flow, in which I've selected 2 random points, 1 and 2, where the corresponding datum elevations are Z1 and Z2. The flow depths are Y1 and Y2, and the velocities at those cross sections are V1 and V2, right? So then if I have all of this information, I can write Bernoulli equation between points 1 and 2 very simply as Y1 plus V1 square by 2G plus Z1 equal to Y2 plus V2 square by 2G plus Z2 plus HF, right? So naturally between these 2 points 1 and 2, if flow is taking place, energy has got to be lost, right? So the total energy at point 1 cannot be exactly equal to the total energy at point 2, because some energy will be used up in overcoming friction, right? So that is what this HF term, you're all very familiar with this in the context of pipe flow. So we are just putting it in the same context for open channel flow, right? Okay, so now how did I get Y1 and Y2 in the first term of Bernoulli equation? Can anybody answer that? Or why did I get Y1 and Y2 as the first term on both sides, on both left hand side and right hand side? Anybody wants to answer that? Okay, if nobody opens their mouth, then I'll call out somebody. Purna Chandra. One second. Purna Chandra.
No, sir. No answer.
No idea. Okay. Pavan.
Sir, I'm thinking.
Sir,
How have we got Y1 and Y2 in this equation? Usually when we write Bernoulli, we write P1 by gamma, P2 by gamma as the first term, right? How did we get Y1 and Y2? Any idea?
sir, if you average the pressure, then we will get
wait. I asked Pavan, why are you in a hurry?
Sorry, sir.
Right? So we are so used to writing P by gamma, correct, Pavan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, how come we have written it as Y1 and Y2 instead of P1 by gamma and P2 by gamma? Okay, thank you, Pavan. Nishchal. Nishchal is here. Yes. So you just joined a little bit, a few minutes back, I guess. So in Bernoulli equation for open channel flow, typically when we write Bernoulli equation, we write the first term as P by gamma, right?
Yes.
How come we've got Y1 and Y2 here instead of P by gamma? Should I not write it as P1 by gamma and P2 by gamma?
Sir,
Yes.
even P by gamma represents that height Y1 only.
Okay. So you're okay. First of all, did anybody ask? Nobody. Okay. Thank you, Nishchal. Nobody asked me at which point on this cross section am I applying Bernoulli equation? Am I applying at some point in the middle of the cross section? Remember, Bernoulli equation is only applicable along a streamline, right? So let us say I pick a point over here, and then I pick another point over here, which is also on the same streamline. Then I have to apply P1 by gamma plus V1 square by 2G plus Z1 at this point, and then P2 by gamma plus V2 square by 2G plus Z2 at this point, right? So which point have I picked so that I'm able to write it like this, Y1 and Y2? Have I picked a point in the middle, or have I picked a point somewhere else, or what is going on?
The points on the surface.
Points on the surface. Okay, that's an interesting point. So if I pick a point on this surface and a point at this point on this surface, okay,
I
interesting.
think point on the ground, sir.
Okay, so the both of you are right. So if I pick a point on the surface, right, or just above the surface, because at the surface the velocity is 0 if you think about it, right, because it's no slip boundary condition. Remember, if I pick a point just above the bed surface, it will have a pressure of P1 by gamma, which will be Y1, right? Similarly here, P2 by gamma will be Y2. Correct?
Yes.
Right? Assuming that, okay, now we are making an assumption that the pressure follows hydrostatic pressure. Although the fluid is moving, we are assuming that the pressure is hydrostatic at both these cross sections, right? So that is one assumption. The other way of looking at it is that instead of picking a point at the bottom, what happens if I pick a point on the surface? This is P atmosphere, this is also P atmosphere. So here I'll get P atmosphere by gamma, here also I'll get P atmosphere by gamma. But my elevation head will become Y1 plus Z1 and Y2 plus Z2. Correct?
Yes.
Right? So whether I pick a point on the surface of the flow, or I pick a point right at the bottom of the channel, both of them will give me the same equation. Agreed? Because P1 by gamma at the bottom will be P atmosphere, which of course cancels out because it's the same on both sides, plus rho g h. Rho g h will be rho g y1. Rho g y1 divided by y1, sorry, divided by rho g will be y1. Similarly here, the pressure will be triangular like this, right? Okay, I've made a bad triangle, but assume that it's a triangle. So the pressure at this point will be rho g y2. So P2 by rho g will be rho g y2 divided by rho g, so that will be y2. Is that okay?
Sir,
Okay.
but
Yes.
why do we assume that the pressure at this bed surface would be hydrostatic pressure?
Because we don't have any other way to estimate what the pressure at this point is. Generally speaking, what we do is whenever we say fluid is exposed to atmospheric pressure, right? If you go to a point at some depth below the water surface, you will assume that the pressure is hydrostatic, even though the fluid may be moving, because the movement of the fluid will add a small pressure to that, which again depends on whether it is going along a curve, or there's so many other factors. Okay, but it's a very good approximation to say that at any point below the water surface, the pressure at that point is almost at the same as if it was hydrostatic. It'll be a little bit more, okay, because the fact that the water is moving will add a little bit pressure. Okay, and that also again depends on whether it is moving along a curve or moving along a straight line. Okay, that if any of you do a more advanced course, I think next semester there's that you can't do. Maybe in your final year there's another advanced course called applied hydraulics, where we talk about when the fluid is in motion, assuming it's hydrostatic pressure is the first approximation. But if you want to get it more accurately, you have to do a little bit more, find out whether the fluid is moving on a straight line or moving along a curve. If it is moving along a convex curve or a concave curve, the flow is different on the inner side and the outer side and so on. Okay, but for now we will assume that the pressure distribution at any cross section is hydrostatic. Okay, so this is assuming pressure distribution is hydrostatic at both cross sections. Okay, so I'll not for now we are going to assume that the pressure distribution is hydrostatic, and this assumption is not at all bad if the channel is straight. If the channel is curved, then this assumption is not very accurate, but it's not off by 100%. It may be off by 5% or 6%. Okay, So this assumption is not terrible. Okay.
Okay.
So we get this expression y1 plus v1 square by 2g plus z1 equal to y2 plus v2 square by 2g plus z2 plus hf. All right. So now let us look at what hf is. So hf, as we all know, is simply f L by d v square by 2g, right? This we are very familiar with, where d is the diameter of the pipe. But if you remember, when we derived the equation for a non-circular duct, non-circular pipe, we came up with this concept of the equivalent diameter, right? We derived this equation hf equal to f L by d v square by 2g for a circular pipe. But if I have a non-circular pipe, I came up with this concept of dh, which is the hydraulic diameter. And this hydraulic diameter, if you go back to your notes in pipe flow, you will find out that dh equal to 4a by p. And this we defined as the hydraulic diameter, right? But in the case of pipe flow, we use another concept called hydraulic radius, which is defined simply as a by p, right? We call this hydraulic radius r equal to a by p, which is actually dh by 4, right? Based on our definition of dh as 4a by p. Hydraulic radius is simply a by p, which is 1/4 of dh. Okay. Now the critical thing to remember in the case of open channel flow is that only the portion of the fluid that is in contact with the bed surface, only that portion you have to count in your perimeter, right? So if I have, let me just draw this very quickly. So if I have a, let us say I have a rectangular cross section. Okay, just imagine I have flow happening in a rectangular okay, and this is the water surface. Okay. So can you imagine a rectangular cross section like this where flow is happening, right? So what is the area of this hydraulic radius equal to a by p? The area will be this area. Okay. Okay, let us say this is the depth. I don't like this. Sorry. Oof. Okay, let me just draw it again. Okay, so let us say I have a rectangular cross section like this. Okay, the flow depth is from here to here. This is my flow depth y, and the bottom width is over here. What is the area in this case? What is the area of the cross section?
Y into B.
B into Y is area, right? What is the perimeter? Remember, this perimeter has to account for the friction losses that are happening between the fluid or the liquid and the solid surface of the open channel, right? So the perimeter will only be B plus 2Y, right? Y on this side plus B plus another Y on this side, right? So the perimeter in this, so area will be equal to B times Y, and perimeter will be equal to B plus 2Y. Does everybody agree with me? Because that is the portion of the liquid that is in contact with the solid surface of the channel. It could be a concrete channel, it could be an earthwork channel, it could be a PVC pipe, it could be whatever it is, right? Doesn't matter. But the perimeter that is in contact with the fluid is only B plus 2Y. So here, because this HF is accounting for friction losses, the friction loss is due to what? Due to the the friction between the solid surface and the liquid, and that is happening only over this perimeter, right, of B plus 2Y. Or if it is a trapezoidal cross section or some other cross section, you can appropriately compute the perimeter, right? So that is the important point that you need to understand. So here the P is what is called the wetted perimeter, the portion of the channel that is in contact with the fluid, by which we mean that it is wet, right? So this portion of the channel is not exposed to the water. So therefore that perimeter will not contribute to the wetted perimeter of the open channel. Similarly, this the water surface is exposed to atmosphere, right? So that also doesn't count in the wetted perimeter. Is this okay? Does everybody understand this? If you have a question, please stop me now. Okay, so I'm assuming that this is fairly straightforward. I'm going to move on. Okay, so that is the concept of the Bernoulli equation in the case of open channel flow. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this idea of uniform flow. Okay, uniform flow is the is a condition where I have constant flow depth, right, across the entire length of the channel, right? So naturally, this cannot happen in a situation where there is, the cross-sectional area is changing, or the slope of the channel is changing, or if the channel is, winding and meandering like a river. Right? If I have a long straight channel in which the slope is constant and the channel cross-section is also constant, then it is possible for me to have uniform flow. And remember what the definition of uniform flow is. Uniform flow means that nothing is changing as a function of space, right? So if I go along the length of the channel, at every point in the channel, the flow depth is the same. It is not at all changing, right? And since we are only going to be talking about constant flow rate, if the flow rate is constant and the cross-sectional area is not changing and it is a straight channel, why will the flow depth change? The flow depth at every cross-section will remain the same, right? So that is this idea of uniform flow. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this approximation, it may not always be 100% accurate to use the uniform flow approximation in every scenario. But the valuable thing about uniform flow approximation is that it allows us to estimate flow rates in a wide variety of scenarios, right? You can assume that over a length of, let us say, 1 kilometer or 5 kilometers, we can assume that the flow depth is not changing. And just by measuring the flow depth, you can convert it to a estimate of the flow rate, right? So let us say you are an engineer who is employed by the state government, okay? And then they come and ask you to, let us say you are stationed at Kalahasti, okay? Then near Kalahasti, there's a big open channel that takes water from the Krishna River all the way to Chennai city. I spoke about it last time, right? So they come and ask you, hey, what is the flow rate in the channel at Srikalahasti? Can you just go and check? You'll say, okay, let me go and check. You go to the site, you measure the depth of the water in the channel. You know the cross-sectional area of the channel. Okay, you know the material of the channel, and then you say, using that depth, you quickly are able to calculate what the flow rate in the channel is, and then you'll communicate it to them. They'll say, okay, so the flow rate is so many cubic feet per second or so many cubic meters per second. So people can use this approximation to very easily estimate the flow rate, and then they can make decisions. Okay, so if this flow rate continues for the next 10 days, then so much water can be moved to Chennai city, or it can be moved to Chittoor district, whatever it is, right? So this uniform flow approximation is a very, very useful tool which allows you to estimate flow rates very easily. Just measure the depth and convert it to a flow rate, right? If you know the cross-section details and so on, right? So you can have a river or a stormwater drain or an open channel that's connecting two different places where the water is flowing. You can very easily apply this uniform flow approximation to estimate the flow rate in a open channel, right? So this has tremendous practical significance. And so you will notice that throughout the rest of the semester, although we'll talk about gradually varied flow, we'll talk about rapidly varied flow, we'll talk about all of these things, but we'll keep coming back to the uniform flow approximation, because the uniform flow approximation is so powerful and so helpful, right, in practical scenarios. All right. Okay. So now this uniform flow approximation, we are going to use it to estimate the velocity at a cross section or the flow rate at a cross section. Okay. So this is what it's going to look like. So we are going to take a channel of uniform bed slope, right, of uniform cross section, in which the flow rate is steady, not changing as a function of time, right? So if you look at this setup, I have point 1 at an elevation of Z1. The bottom elevation is Z1. Point 2, the bottom elevation is Z2. The distance between these 2 points is, let us say it is capital L. Okay. So So now I'm saying that the flow is uniform. When I say the flow is uniform, it naturally implies that y1 and y2 are the same, right? It has to be the same. The incoming flow rate is steady, right? The cross section of the channel is not changing, right? So at cross section 1, if it is a rectangular channel, it is the same rectangular channel at cross section 2 also, right? So if flow rate is steady, the cross section is identical at both sections, then y1 and y2 will be exactly equal. That's the very definition of open channel flow. And similarly, v1 and v2 will also be equal, right? So if I assume that the flow rate is steady and the cross section is uniform, then y1 and y2, since y1 and y2 are the same, v1 and v2 will also be the same, right? So what does this mean? This simplifies our Bernoulli equation tremendously, right? So our Bernoulli equation will simply become Z1 equal to Z2 plus HF. Everybody agrees with this? Y1 and Y2 are the same on both sides. V1 square by 2G, V2 square by 2G are the same on both sides. They all get cancelled out and you are left with Z1 equal to Z2 plus HF, right? So now I can simply rewrite this as, if I assume the bed slope is S0, okay, then I can write it as HF equal to Z1 minus Z2, which is equal to S0 into L, right? If the slope is S0, S0 into L will tell you the difference in the bed elevations between points 1 and 2. Is that okay? This is fairly easy, right? The simple geometry. Okay. Now we've already derived an expression for HF. Remember, in a couple of slides back, we wrote FL by DH V square by 2G. Now I've replaced that DH with my hydraulic radius, right? You remember hydraulic radius? Hydraulic radius is DH by 4. Sorry. Yeah, hydraulic radius is DH by 4. So DH, I've replaced it by 4R. Okay. So now I have two equations for HF. One is that HF is equal to S0 times L. And the other is that, okay, where is my mouse pointer? Okay, I'm not able to see my mouse pointer. Okay, there it is. HF equal to S0 times L and HF equal to F times L by 4R into V square by 2G. Now I'll simply equate these two and I'll get what is called the Chezy's equation, right? So what have I done? I have simply equated these two equations. S0 into L equal to F into L by 4R V square by 2G. Then I've rearranged terms such that I have velocity on one side and everything else I've taken to the other side. I get this expression, under root 8G by F into under root R S0. Okay. So this is a very popular equation called Chezy's equation. And this under root 8G by F, I'm going to replace it with what is called the Chezy's coefficient, capital C. So V equal to capital C, Chezy's coefficient, multiplied by under root R S0. Okay. So that is the Chezy's equation. Now, okay, any questions so far?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now what has also been observed by this American scientist called Manning, I forget his first name. His surname is Manning. Okay, so Manning observed, I think around the 1920s or so, he observed that this Chezy's coefficient C could be approximated by R to the power 1 by 6, where R is my hydraulic radius, divided by N, where he came up with his own coefficient called the Manning's roughness coefficient. Okay, so then he substituted this back into Chezy's equation and he gets a new equation which looks like this: V equal to 1 by N, R power 2 by 3. How did it become R power 2 by 3? It is, so previous equation, it looked like square root of R. Now I'm replacing this C with R power 1 by 6. So R power 1 by 6 into R power 1 by 2 becomes R power 2 by 3, right? So this is the very, very famous and very popular Manning's equation. The velocity at a cross section is simply 1 by N, where N is this Manning's roughness coefficient multiplied by R power 2 by 3 and S0 power half, right? So now imagine this. Imagine you are at that Kalahasti location. You've gone there to measure the flow rate, right? But you can't directly measure the flow rate. You just measure the flow depth. You know the slope of the channel at that location, right? Because the channel is constructed by, by us. So we know what this bed slope is. So we know this S0 term. Okay. We know that this channel is made of concrete. Okay. If if we get a chance, maybe next semester we will, we'll stop by that open channel. It is maybe about 20 kilometers from our campus. That is where we are going to get the water for our campus in the next few years. Okay. So the channel has a lining made of concrete, right? So if I know that my channel lining is concrete, I will know what the roughness coefficient is. I know the bed slope, I know the roughness coefficient, I know the flow depth, and I know the size of the cross section. I know that the trapezoid, when you visit it, you'll see it. It's a trapezoidal cross section. So if I know the shape of that trapezoid, I can use that flow depth to estimate what this hydraulic radius will be, right? So I'll put that into the equation. I get V. You see how useful it is? I know that it is a trapezoidal cross section, and I know the shape details of that. I know what the bottom width of the trapezoid is. I know what the side slope of that trapezoid is. I know the flow depth. I go out and measure the flow depth. Very easy to measure, right? You just put a scale in. You have a graduated scale. It tells you what the flow depth is. I know the flow, the bed slope S0. Then just using that one measurement of depth, I can quickly calculate what the velocity is. Multiply this by the area of the cross section. I get the flow rate, right? So I can use either Chezy's equation, which will be Q equal to A into C under root R S0, or I can use Manning's equation, Q equal to 1 by N A into R power 2 by 3 S0 power half. Is this okay? Right? And then of course the ranges for the different values of C and N are given. Chezy's coefficient typically ranges between 30 and 90. The units are mixed units, so we'll ignore that. So typically we just say Chezy's coefficient is 40 or 60 or whatever it is. We don't bother with the coefficient, but remember that it has dimensions. Okay, so we typically ignore this because it's mixed unit. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, and the roughness coefficient ranges from about 0.01 to 0.15. This again has mixed units. We typically just say Manning's coefficient is 0.01 or 0.02. We don't bother with the units. Okay, these are empirical equations, right? So what is the use of this this expression? That if I give you the flow depth and the cross-section details and the bed slope, I can very easily obtain the velocity and the flow rate at this cross-section, right? Or in other words, if I give you the flow rate and the cross-section details, you can very easily find out what the flow depth should be, right? Why would you need this? The first part is very obvious, right? If I give you the flow depth and cross-section details, you can find out the velocity and flow rate. But why do you need the second part? What if I give you Q and cross-section details and ask you to find flow depth? Why is this important? Why should we know this? Can anybody think of why it would be necessary to find out the flow depth? Anybody, quickly.
Maybe for pressure.
What is that?
Pressure.
Pressure.
Want to build something about it.
You want to build something about, okay. So let us imagine that I have an open channel.
Flux also.
What is that?
We want
Flux, so to calculate flux, that flow rate.
No. I'm saying given flow. One at a time. Don't all talk at the same time. So what I'm saying is, if I give you the flow rate and the cross-section details, you can obtain the flow depth from this equation, right? So the flow rate is known. Why would you be interested in flow depth? Is there any scenario where you would be interested in flow depth? Okay, I'll give you the answer. Let us say I have a very active monsoon this year. Okay, and the monsoon is such that the dam is getting filled with water. Okay, and then the projection is that there's going to be some more rain coming in the next few days. So what the people who control the dam, what they'll do is they'll open the dam gates and let out some of the water, right? So that the dam can store whatever excess rainfall is going to come in the next few days, right? So when I let out water, I will let out I'll measure the amount of water that I let out. Okay, I will say I'm going to release 1000 cubic feet per second for the next 48 hours, so that the dam remains safe. Otherwise, if the dam gets too full, it may topple. You know what can happen when the dam gets too full or whatever, it can topple over, right? So there's a design safety water level in the dam. So if the water level starts approaching that, the people who control the dam will start letting out water so that the water level can be kept below that danger level. Okay, so when they let out water, they let out a certain amount of water. Right now, if I have a channel, an open channel that is connected to this dam, and the authorities tell you that we are letting out so many cubic feet per second of water. Okay, so that flow rate is going to come through the channel. Okay, then you can use this expression and find out what the flow depth will be for that flow rate. And when you measure the flow depth, if it says that the flow depth is going to be very high, then you can decide whether or not people have to be evacuated from the canal banks, right? So because some people will be living very close to that canal, very close to the water, right? If the water level is too high, then their houses will get flooded. So you can use this information to quickly obtain what the flow depth will be. And if that flow depth is above a certain height, then you will say, you know what, there's a danger of this area getting flooded. So maybe these people have to be evacuated, those who are living along the banks of the river. Right, so sometimes you can use it this way, sometimes you can use it the other way. Okay, so that is the practical use of using this kind of an equation. Sometimes the flow rate, you want to find out the flow depth and decide whether the area is going to get flooded or not. All right. Okay, so this uniform flow, the flow depth at uniform, we give it a particular terminology. We call it normal depth. Right. So the flow depth at uniform flow condition, we give it the name of normal depth, and we give it the symbol Y0. Okay, in some textbooks you will see YN, but I prefer to use Y0. All right, any questions?
No, sir.
All right, so I think I've solved a couple of example problems here. Very, very straightforward problems. I will not spend too much time on this. Okay, so let's quickly go through this. A straight rectangular channel, 2 meter wide, 1 meter deep, laid on a slope of 2 degrees. If Chezy's coefficient is 60, estimate the uniform flow rate, right? Such a simple problem. The flow depth is given 1 meter. The rectangular channel's width is given 2 meters, the bottom width, right? So then these two pieces of information is enough to calculate area and wetted perimeter, right? Area is 2 into 1, 2 meters square. Wetted perimeter is 2 plus 2 times 1, right? Remember B plus 2Y, right? So that's 4 meters. So then once you have A and P, you can find R. R is equal to A by P, 0.5. Then S0 is given tan 2 degrees. So you simply put in everything into the equation. Q equal to A into C into under root R S0. A is known, you just found out here. C, Chezy's coefficient is given 60. R you've just found out, and S0 is also given. So you put all those terms into the equation, you find out the flow rate, 16 cubic meters per second. Okay, very, very straightforward. Okay, I'm just going to move on. Next problem. An asphalt lined trapezoidal channel with a Manning's roughness coefficient of 0.016 carries 9 cubic meters per second of water under uniform flow conditions when S0 equal to so and so. What is the normal depth? Right. So when I say normal depth, I mean what is the flow depth at which this flow rate will flow under uniform flow conditions, right? So then the side angle or the side slope of the trapezoid makes an angle of 50 degrees with the horizontal, right? So that's given to you. Then you're told what the bottom width of the bed slope is. So the bottom width of the channel is. Bottom width is typically represented by capital B. Okay. Then we also have a top width. This top width in the case of trapezoidal channel will simply be B plus 2 times this length, right? This capital T will be B plus 2 times this length, right? Because this length is the trapezoid is symmetric on both sides. So you can simply multiply it by 2 times this length. You can add that to B, you will get capital T, right? So T is B plus 2y0 cotangent 50 degrees. So that is simple geometry. You can figure it out. And then the area of this trapezoidal cross section will be half B plus T into y0, right? This is also fairly straightforward geometry. I'm not going to spend time on this. Then the perimeter will be B plus 2y0 cosecant 50 degrees, right? This is also straightforward geometry. So what is the perimeter? Wetted perimeter will be this length plus the bottom width plus this length, right? So that is B plus 2y0 cosecant 50 degrees. All right. So all of this is straightforward stuff. then we put all of this information into the Manning's equation. What is Manning's equation? Q equal to 1 by n, A into R power 2 by 3, S naught power half. So you put all of those. See, I've converted A and R, I've brought them together and written it as A power 5 by 3 and R power 2 by 3. Okay. So this, I mean, it's already explained, so I don't want to spend time on this. Okay. So I've just expanded it out. Now I've got an equation, fairly complex equation. You know, it's difficult to solve this, without using a trial and error approach. So what you can do is you can simply make guesses for Y naught and then try to equate LHS and RHS. Guess Y naught and then try to solve both LHS and RHS and see if they're equal. If they're not equal, then again guess Y naught and then keep doing that iteratively until you guess the value of Y naught correctly, right? So if you solve it iteratively, you get the answer Y naught equal to 1.387 meters, whatever it may be. Okay, any questions on these two examples? Okay, let's keep going. Right, so now this concept of most efficient cross section, this is also something very interesting, right? So as you have seen already from Manning's equation, we have seen that for a given channel material, given that it's it's concrete, or if it's made of wood, or if it is made of brick lining or whatever it is, for a given the material and given a bed slope, Q is proportional to R power 2 by 3, right? Because 1 by n is fixed once you fix the channel material. If you fix it as concrete, or you fix it as earthwork, or you fix it as brick lining or whatever it is, Manning's roughness coefficient gets fixed. Once you fix the bed slope, S naught is also fixed. So Q only depends on R power 2 by 3. At Q is proportional to R power 2 by 3. So given a certain channel, if I want to maximize the flow rate, I have to maximize R, right? If R increases, Q also increases. If R decreases, Q also decreases, right? And again, for a given cross-sectional area, if I want to maximize R, P has to be minimum, right? The wetted perimeter has got to be minimum. Okay, because R is A by P. So I want to find out the flow depth such that my wetted perimeter is minimum. Why is it important to minimize wetted perimeter? If wetted perimeter is minimum, that means friction losses will be minimum. So the channel can carry more fluid, more efficiently. Yes, somebody has a question. Somebody unmuted their microphone.
No, by mistake.
Okay, all right. So for a given cross-sectional area, once you fix your A, R is maximum when P is minimum, right? So when the wetted perimeter is minimum, that means less friction losses. So the flow can be more efficient, right? Less friction is obviously more efficient. Okay. So I'm just going to take it as an example. I'm going to take a trapezoidal cross-section. You can do this for any cross-section, right? Trapezoidal cross-section with bottom width of B, with flow rate of Y naught, and a side slope of M is to 1, right? M horizontal, 1 vertical. You can also write your side slope as M is to 1. Okay. So then I can write my wetted perimeter as B plus 2 Y naught square root of 1 plus M square. Okay. This is straightforward geometry, so I'll not explain this. So my objective is to minimize my wetted perimeter. So what do? I set my dP by dy to 0. I want you to solve this and see what you get. When I do that and I solve this, I will get R equal to Y naught by 2, right? So when my hydraulic radius is half of the flow depth, that is the condition for which I get maximum flow rate in a trapezoidal channel. Okay, I have not placed any constraint on my M value. M could be anything, right? No matter what the M value is, for a trapezoidal cross section, flow rate is maximum when the hydraulic radius is Y naught by 2. Okay. So in fact, for a rectangular cross section, a rectangle is basically a limiting case of a trapezoid, right? When M equal to 0, this trapezoid becomes a rectangle. Correct? So when you do that, you will find out that for a rectangle, the maximum flow rate happens when the flow depth Y naught is equal to half the bottom width, half of B by 2. Okay. And then similarly, you can also find out for which value of M will I get the most efficient cross section, which means for which value of m will my perimeter be minimum. So you have to set this set dp by dm to 0 and solve similarly. If you do that, you will get m equal to 1 by root 3 or theta equal to 60 degrees, which means if this side slope makes an angle of 60 degrees with the horizontal, that is the angle for which you will get the most efficient trapezoidal cross section. Okay, so I'll leave the mathematics to you. You can do this dp by dy, set it to 0, do that and solve it, and you will find out what this is. Similarly, you can set dp by dm to 0 and so on. Okay.
Sir,
Yes.
to minimize set dt by dy equal to 0, r equal to y by 2 for trapezium. I didn't understand.
No, when you set dp by dy to 0, right, and solve that equation, when you set dp by dy to 0 and solve this equation, you will get an expression between b and y. Okay, when you put that into your r, you will get r equal to y naught by 2. You know, you sit with the pen and paper. I know it's difficult, but sit with the pen and paper and do it. You will find that r equal to y naught by 2 when dp by dy is 0.
Even though means like it's not physically, I didn't understand. Means like how come we get maximum flow rate when r equal to y by 2? That means what does it mean?
No, what it means is, see, I have set dp by dy to 0 and found out the minimum p. I have found out the condition at which y, at what value of y given a trapezoidal cross section will I get the minimum perimeter.
So r is some radius you are saying, no?
I know r is a by p, na? R is a by p. So when I find out the relationship between b and y that gives me minimum p, you understand what I'm saying? When I find out the relationship between b and y that gives me minimum p, you put that expression into this r, because
So
r can be computed with once you know.
That's what I was saying, sir. So means like after solving we should get y as a function, relation between b and y, na?
After solving, we should get a relationship between b and y. Yes.
Then you told we are getting something like r equal to y naught by 2. That's
the final expression. I've written the final expression without writing the intermediate expression between b and y and so on.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so you see, because we are assuming that, okay, in fact what you have to do, okay, maybe okay, do I strongly encourage you to do this. You know, if you sit with a piece of pen and paper, it's a straightforward thing. Okay, it won't take too much time. So you just have to write this entire equation dp by dy. You have to write the entire equation only in terms of y, right? But I have a b in this equation. How do I convert this b into y?
B and y are independent, no?
They are independent, but I can write it in terms of y.
I mean, you can use m.
Okay, I'll just write. So area.
You will use m. That's it. No?
Yeah, I will use m also. Wait, area a equal to.
Sir, but m is also not a constant, na?
No, m I'm keeping it fixed. I'm
so
keeping. Wait. I'm not constraining this m. That's what I'm saying. For a given m and a given area, right? I'm trying to find out what relationship. Let me just write it. Okay. So what will be the area? B. What is it? B plus my into y. This is area. Correct? For a trapezoidal cross section, the area is b plus my into y. Okay, how did I get that? Or b y naught. Okay, it is basically the area of the trapezium is the area of this rectangle plus the area of these two triangles. Correct? So area of the rectangle is b into y. Area of this triangle is half my into y, half my square. Half my square plus half my square, my square. This is okay. If you
okay, sir.
sit with a piece of pen and paper, you can get it. So then I can rewrite this b is equal to what will it be, a by y minus my. Is that correct? B equal to A by Y minus My, right? So you, or in fact, everything should be Y naught. Okay, sorry, this should all be Y naught. So M Y naught into Y naught. So B will be equal to A by Y naught minus M Y naught. Now you put that into this equation. So this P will become P equal to A by Y naught minus M Y naught plus 2 Y naught into square root of 1 plus M square, whatever it is. Okay. Is that all right? So now I have an equation in which A is fixed, M is fixed. The only variable is Y naught. Can I not differentiate this with dP by dy and find out the relationship between A and Y naught and M? A equated to 0, I'll get an expression. Okay. Trust me, you just do it. Okay. It's really straightforward. It won't take too much time. And then you go back and find out what the value of B will be. You'll find out what the value of P will be. So, and then you find out R, you'll get Y naught by 2. Okay. Please spend a few minutes and just do this. It's very straightforward. It's not all that difficult. Any questions? Is it okay? All right. So, similarly for side slope, right? So then you'll have to rewrite it in such a way that, you write, oh, you already did that. Now B in terms of M, you'll have to write it in terms of M and then expand it out, and then you'll get it. Okay. So you just have to solve for it. You'll find out that M equal to 1 by root 3 or theta equal to 60 degrees. So that is those are the conditions under which you get minimum perimeter. Okay. All right. So now we are going to go to the next topic, which is called specific energy. Okay. So the specific energy, already we know what total energy is, right? Total energy, we have defined it as Y plus V square by 2G plus Z at any cross section. Okay. We are going to define another term called specific energy in such a way, right? So this E, specific energy, is simply Y plus V square by 2G. Okay. Y plus V square by 2G. I'm going to rewrite this in terms of Q square. It will be Y plus Q square by 2G A square. Right? So if you see, this E is, it looks like it's dependent on Y and something else. But this something else is also dependent on Y. Right? And in fact, it's dependent on Y square, and it's in the denominator. You can see that, right? A is a function of Y. So A square will be Y square. So I have Y plus some function with Y square in the denominator, right? So this will be some kind of a cubic function. Okay. So what I did was I tried to plot this specific energy as a function of Y for a given discharge. Okay. For a given cross section, right? And then I got something that looks like this. I have plotted E on the x-axis and the flow depth Y on the y-axis. I tried varying the different values of Y, okay, and tried to compute what the value of E was for different values of Y given the flow rate and given the cross-section details, right? If it is a trapezoidal cross-section or a rectangular cross-section, no matter what cross-section you pick, right, you will get a curve that looks like this. Okay, so this specific energy takes a minimum value for a certain flow depth, and for every other specific energy, right, higher than that minimum specific energy, there are two possible depths for the same specific energy. Is this okay? Right? So this specific energy curve has a minima at this point, and at this minima point, it has a certain flow depth, which we'll call the critical flow depth. For any other any other specific energy, there will be two possible depths for the same energy. Do you agree with that? If I draw this dotted line at any other location other than this minima, it will intersect the curve at 2 points, right? Which means for the same specific energy, I can have two different depths. One depth I'll call the subcritical depth, and the other depth I'll call the supercritical depth. Okay? All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this, for a given flow rate, minimum specific energy corresponds to critical flow depth where Froude number is equal to 1. I have not yet proved this to you. Just hang on for some time. Right? Minimum specific energy corresponds to critical flow depth. Right? And then for all other values of specific energy, there are two possible flow depths. One is called the subcritical flow depth where Froude number is less than 1. And the other is called the supercritical flow depth where Froude number is greater than 1. Is this okay? All right.
Sir.
Yes. Did you say yes, sir? Okay. So I'm assuming that this so far it's okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out at what condition does this minima happen, right? I want to find out what is the condition for this minima. So how do I find out the minima? I take a given value of Q and I set this specific energy dE as a function of dy, and I say dE by dy equal to 0. Right? E is a function of y. For a given value of Q, I'm going to find out what is the condition for this minima, right? So E equal to y plus q square by 2g a square. What was that? E equal to y plus q square by 2g a square. So I'm going to differentiate this with respect to y. I'll get this dE by dy equal to 1 minus q square by ga cube dA by dy equal to 0. Right? Now I want to find out what this dA by dy is. So what I'll do is I'll take some random cross section where the flow is at some depth, and at the top width is given by this capital T. So what I'll do is I'll take an elemental area, an elemental strip of thickness dy at the surface of the channel, right? So this area of this elemental strip is dA, which will be T times dy. Agreed?
Yes, sir.
Right. So dA by dy is simply capital T. Right. So I've found out what this dA by dy is. Okay. So I'll replace that dA by dy with capital T and I'll get q square T by ga cube equal to 1. So this is the condition for minimum specific energy. So if q square T by ga cube equal to 1, that means I will have minimum specific energy. All right. So this is what it means. For a given flow rate, critical flow corresponds to minimum specific energy. I have not yet proved that this is equal to critical flow. Okay. I'm keeping it as suspense for the very end. Okay. I'm saying for a given flow rate, this condition q square by 2 ga cube, which corresponds to minimum specific energy, is the same as critical flow is what I'm saying. Okay. But we'll show that it is indeed critical flow a little bit later. Just hang on. Now I want to also...
critical flow?
Critical flow, if you remember correctly, in the earlier slides, we said critical flow is when Froude number equal to 1.
Okay.
Okay. So I have not yet shown that this is the same as Froude number equal to 1. I'm going to show it. Just wait for a couple of slides. Okay. So now this is for a given Q. I find out what the condition for the minima on that curve is. Okay. And I find out that condition at which you get this minima is q square T by ga cube equal to 1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it the other way around and say, what if my Q is variable? For the same specific energy, I can have two different flow rates, right? Let me try that. Let me see what happens if I keep my E constant and vary my Q. Okay, and I set dQ by dy to 0 and find out what happens then, right? Remember, E is equal to y plus q square by 2g a square. I rewrite this in this form, Q equal to a into under root 2g e minus y, right? So for a given specific energy, I want to find out, what the condition for dq by dy. Does it have a minima or maxima, or what does it have? So I'm going to set this dq by dy to 0. dq by dy will be, I'm just simply applying chain rule, under root 2g e minus y into dA by dy minus this d by dy of this under root 2g e minus y will give me this expression multiplied by a. So I've got this complicated looking expression, under root 2g e minus y into dA by dy minus ga divided by under root 2g e minus y, right? So what is under root 2g e minus y? It is q by a, right? I'll replace this under root 2g e minus y with q by a in both these terms. So I'll get t, dA by dy is t, remember from a couple of slides back, dA by dy is t multiplied by under root 2g e minus y, which is q by a, minus g a square by q. How did I get this? Under root 2g e minus y is simply q by a. So in the denominator I have q by a, so that a goes to the numerator, it becomes g a square equal to 0. Then I rearrange the terms. I'm surprised to see that I get the same expression, q square t by g a cube equal to 1. Right? This is exactly the same as what I got for that minimum for the specific energy. Right? And if you do one more step, you will find out that this q is the maxima. Right? So you'll have to take the second differential, d square q by dy square, and find out if it is positive or negative. And then I'll leave that to you. You will find out that this condition is a maxima. This condition is a maxima condition, right? So if I vary my q for a given specific energy, critical flow corresponds to maximum flow rate, right? So for the same specific energy, critical flow condition corresponds to maximum discharge, right? So any questions up to this point? Right. So this is the point where, what we have shown is the minima for specific energy. The condition for minima is q square t by g a cube equal to 1. Okay. That is, if I keep, q constant and vary e and find the minima, I find out that the minima happens when q square t by g a cube is equal to 1. Then I say I'll keep the specific energy constant and vary my q and see if I can find out what the condition for minima or maxima for q is. So I did that, dq by dy, I set it to 0 and I rearrange terms and I get the same expression, q square t by g a cubed equal to 1. And then I also find out that it is a maxima condition. You will do the second derivative and find out whatever. Okay. So this is very interesting, that if I specify, if I give you a certain specific energy, this q square t by g a cube corresponds to maximum flow rate, maximum discharge, and q square t by g a cube equal to 1 also corresponds to minimum specific energy. Okay. But I have still not proved to you that it is the same as critical flow. Okay. So that is what we are going to do next. Right. So we spoke about Froude number in the very early part of the lecture, and I said Froude number equal to v by under root gy. And I said that if this number is equal to 1, that is equal to critical flow, critical condition. And I kept saying that critical flow corresponds to this, critical flow corresponds to this, right? But I have not yet shown that q square t by g a cube equal to 1 is the same as this v by under root gy. Okay, so for that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to find out what is the relationship between this v by under root gy and q square t by g a cube. Right? It's actually one and the same thing. Q square t by g a cube, I can rewrite this as v square by g into a by t. Does everybody agree? Q square by a square is v square. So I have got v square t by ga, right? So I just simply rewrite it as v square by g into a by t, right? So this is actually Froude number square. So if q square t by ga cube equal to 1, then Froude number is also equal to 1, right? Because it's Froude number square, right? But how did this become Froude number? Didn't I say Froude number is v by under root gy? I did say that, but that is a special case for a rectangular cross section. For a rectangular cross section, a by t will be y, correct? The top width is the same as the bottom width. So a by top width will be the flow depth y. So for a rectangular cross section, Froude number is v by under root gy. But in a general sense, if I were to write Froude number more correctly, Froude number to be written precisely, it is v by under root g into a by t. Okay. So now you can see that this v by under root g into a by t is the same as q square t by ga cube. I mean, if you take the square of this, that is the same as q square t by ga cube.
So t varies with height now.
T varies with height, yes.
But a by t remains constant.
No. If I change the flow depth, the top width will change. But for a rectangular cross section, no matter what my flow depth is, a by t will always remain same. Correct? Only for a trapezoidal or for some other shape, other than rectangular, when I change the flow depth, the top width will also change.
Okay.
Is that okay? So that is the, so can everybody now recognize that this q square t by ga cube equal to 1 is the same as saying v by under root g a by t equal to 1. Okay, because this v by under root g a t is the square root of this. So if it is equal to 1, square root of 1 is 1, so there's no problem. And if it is less than 1, then this will also be less than 1, right? And if it is greater than 1, this will also be greater than 1. So that is what. So if q square t by ga cube is less than 1, then it is subcritical flow. If q square t by ga cubed is greater than 1, it is supercritical flow. And if q square t by ga cubed is equal to 1, it is critical flow. Is that okay? Any questions on this? All right. So now you may be wondering, what is the use of this specific energy? Why should we do all this q square t by ga cube equal to 1? What is the use of this? Okay, so I'll answer that very briefly, right? So now, let us say I have a uniform flow condition set up, okay, and my channel is running for many kilometers, right? It may be running for 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 kilometers. Can I maintain the same slope for the entire length of 100 kilometers? Is it possible always? Right? Because the topography is varying from place to place. If you come to Tirupati, it's all mountainous and then it's flat and then again there's mountain and so on. And I want to build a channel or construct a channel that is going for 100 kilometers. Right? The lands, you've all done surveying, right? You've all done the surveying course, right? Yeah. So surveying, you know that the slope changes from place to place. At one area, within our campus, if you see, some parts of the campus, it's very steep. Some parts, it's relatively flat and so on, right? So if I want to have a channel that's running for many hundreds of kilometers or tens of 20, 30, 40 kilometers and so on, it's impossible to have the very same slope throughout, right? So there may be, you may have the same slope for maybe 5 kilometers. And then after 5 kilometers, you may have to change the slope to a new slope, because otherwise the cost of construction will go very high if you want to maintain same slope throughout the entire duration. So at these points where there's a transition between one slope to the other, it will change from one uniform flow to another uniform flow, right? So there you can use this idea of specific energy. You can use it very, it can be used for, to understand the flow conditions, how it changes from one uniform flow to another uniform flow, right? So there, the specific energy concept becomes very useful. Okay, so we will look into that more in the next coming lectures. So maybe we'll spend one more lecture on uniform flow, then one more lecture on gradually varied flow, or maybe 2 lectures on gradually varied flow, and then 1 lecture on rapidly varied flow, and we'll be done. Okay, so today is April 24th, right? So how many classes more do we have? Next week, we'll have 25, 26, 28, we'll have a class. May 1st, we'll have a class, that's next Friday. And then the week after that, 2 more classes, right? So we have 4 more classes left. Next week, 2 classes. And then the week after that, 2 more classes, right? Okay, any questions?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we will meet on Tuesday. All right. So in the meanwhile, if you have questions, please send them to me. I'm going to send the solution for that Hardy cross, the pipe network problem in some time. Okay. I'll set up my Excel file and just send it out to everybody. All right. Thank you very much and stay safe. We will meet on, Tuesday. Right. Thank you.